Hello, students. Hitting the math connections out of 3.1. 3.1 has a 1, a 3, a 5, and then 10 through 13. You might notice a trend here. I love the connecting math to the classroom. When students come to you with questions, that's where you have a chance to shine. So you're going to get a lot of those. You'll get a few of the other ones, which are kind of just general connections to what we've done. I decided not to do the major drawbacks to each of the following: Egyptian, Babylonian, and Roman. Hopefully, as you look at them, you can see that is cool, and also see that is horrific. How would I do math with that? Especially like the Roman system. Like you've got subtraction and all these other things. And there is a way to do math with the Roman. Maybe at the end of this video, I'll show you some interesting ideas with how you can do that. Egyptian was pretty quick. Like subtraction with Egyptian was fantastic, right? Because it's you just see how many you have, you can subtract. If you don't, you go and do a regrouping. Take a lotus flower and turn yourself into 10 scrolls. And if you took that wording right there and shared it with any of your friends and said, I'm in a math class, my teacher just said, take a lotus flower and trade it in for 10 scrolls. It feels like you're in a video game, not an actual math class, but it is a math class. So let's see here. I think I said, what did I say? 1, 3, 5. So one, explain why a number and a numeral are considered different. And this is partly language. It's also partly culture. If you were in class, you got a chance to see me go over everything. The number 7, we could write it this way. The different groups in history would have written it differently. Someone could have written this. That is also the number 7, but it's a different numeral. So the number is the idea, right? In Roman system, it would have been this. So again, the numerals may look different, but the number can be the same. If we were looking at this in a base 5 system, it would look like this because it's one group of 5 and two ones. So again, each of these are numerals. Each of the numerals look different, but they all represent the same number. And that's why we can't say that the numeral and the number are the same thing. But that's also the same with words, right? I think there's some old poem, a rose by any other name still smells as sweet or something like that. Clearly, I'm a math teacher, not a poet. But the essence of it was to say, it doesn't matter what you call a rose, it still has the same properties. Like it's still a rose. So the concept of a rose is separate from the way that we say it, or maybe the word that we write. But the idea of a rose is kind of this universal thing that everyone around the world can understand what a rose is, but the word might be different. The symbols that we write to represent rose might be different. And so that's the idea of a number and a numeral. The number is the idea, the numeral is what we write. And that's really a big difference. Okay, I'll let you do difference between 0 and nothing. I've already talked in some of the other videos about how to rewrite numbers. So that's kind of interesting. I'll let you take a look at some other cultures. Just, yeah, Google it and put it into Wikipedia, something like that. I guarantee you're going to see different pieces. Connecting math to the classroom is a pretty common one, right? I remember being 20th Century Fox. I remember 20th Century Fox back when I was growing up. So back in the 80s and 90s, and there was a company called 20th Century Fox. And then all of a sudden, the year 2000 came around and they became 21st Century Fox. And I was thinking the same thing this student was. What the heck? They got it all wrong. Like this is the year 2000. It should be the 20th century. So just be thinking about this. You're going to put this in terms that you would explain to a student. But if you think about your own life, um, there was a point in time where you were where you were born, and then there's a point in time when you turned 1 year old. What would you call that period of time before you turned 1 year old? Okay, so you're not one yet. What year? Because this is really like 365 days. What year would you call that? Now, most people would probably say that was your first year of life. Then you turned 1, and then you had another year of life before you turned 2. Before you turned 2 would have been your second year of life. So the 2, when you say I just celebrated my second birthday, has culminated 2 years worth. And the day you turn 2, you start your third year. Okay. So that might help to say, why isn't it in the 20th century? So hopefully that can help you with your student. This is understanding the numeral here. The 2 3s in this numeral are different because you have the same digit but in different values. I'll let you explain that one. I'm not going to go through that one. Student claims Roman system is base 10 because it has symbols for 1, 10, 100, 1,000. Yeah, you might have to think about that one. Is it base 10? What makes a system a base system, like base 2 or base 3 or base 5? Is a system a base 5 system because it had symbols for 5 and 25 and so forth? Is that what makes it a base system? Or are there other pieces that we've already talked about? And the last one's about Roman numerals, whether you can write an I with a bar over it to represent 1,000, or if you have to use the M. And it's a reasonable question. So if you have a symbol for M, maybe you should use the symbol for M because it's going to look a little bit more confusing, right? Ones and bars instead of M's. If you have the M, use the M. And then for anything bigger than that, maybe go on, use the other symbols. There will come a time where you can't go any further. If you watch the other video I made, you'll see it. That is about it for now. So that wraps that up. That is chapter 3. That's everything for the first exam. So you've got chapter 1 through 3.1 will be on the first exam. I'll talk more about it this week in class. And that's it for me with the MC portion. All right, off you go.